Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, I would just like to say that I'm not a rock art expert. I'm just getting interested in the subject last few years. So these are very casual observations based on field visits, photographs, and just looking at various sites, from a general perspective. So just quickly summarize Indian rock art and then the two sets of evidence, and then just highlight similarities and differences between the two data sets. And a lot of my case studies and examples come from Madhya Pradesh also, where I work in central India. So Indian rock art is known for over a century and found across India. It includes paintings, etchings, bruisings, and copule marks. It includes images belonging to various periods, presumably, even though we have not proven yet that some of these go back to prehistoric age. They seem to be prehistoric, at least Mycolithic times, Mesolithic times. Stylistic continuity is there among certain cultural groups. Very few absolute dates available for these rock art sites. Interpretations on function and purpose of rock art sites vary between scholars, as well as interpretations, identification of individual paintings and individual images. For example, there's differences between different scholars identifying ostrich and giraffe in Indian rock art. So they're just looking at paintings, for example. We have distribution mostly in central India, pockets of peninsular India, and parts of northern India. And these include paintings, engravings, copule marks, and various kinds of images. Here you can just see some examples that have been classified based on style and superimposition. And in the past, some of my students have also worked on compiling this data and trying to understand patterns, number of sites in different regions, how they are distributed, the density of sites known, which geographic areas need more surveys, for example, and then combinations of different types of art. This was a master's thesis in my department. Just proportions and frequencies of different types. But these things are going to change over time as more sites are found. And also looking at subject matter. Which figures are more frequent? Because we often look at rock art in Europe because it's very well preserved, occurs in caves, and people have dated them, some of them as well. But in India or South Asia, we have a dominance of animal figures, human figures in geometric patterns, and then other types of images and subject matters follow. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight was differences in paintings between different regions. For example, looking at northern region and southern region, or central region and southern peninsular India. Why am I doing that? Is because it has implications for understanding the petroglyphs. We don't know where the makers of the petroglyphs came from. We don't know which cultural they belong to. We don't know which direction they were influenced from, whether they came from central India, southern India, or multiple directions. So it's important to know there's geographic differences in the paintings as well. For example, we have bruisings of cattle more common in South India than other parts of India. Then we have variations between Neolithic, Chalcolithic cattle keepers, and then we have, for example, differences in quality as well. And certain things like hoof prints or design of the eye or showing the eye in animals and humans also varies geographically. So this is something that we can keep in mind when trying to understand where the origin and how the origin of petroglyphs happened until we have more dates and buried sites. For example, weapons and implements are rarely depicted in South Indian rock art compared to other parts of India. So this could be a matter of lack of research or research bias, but at the moment this is based on publications available. And one problem is that a lot of the publications have recorded information unevenly, so we cannot make a meaningful comparison yet. And then to show you some styles and examples from published data. So here we have different types of fauna depicted. And I'm showing this because not only stylistic differences, but some designs. As you can see, these X-ray patterns and intricate designs of these animals are matching with the petroglyphs in Konkan. Like for what you saw in Barsu, for example, the tigers next to the human figure are made in a similar way. And then one thing is scenes. We have specific scenes in paintings, which we are currently lacking in the petroglyphs. And that's going to also be related to the medium, pigment versus engraving. And I'll talk about that separately. And then looking at the eyes I was talking about. Certain pockets, certain regions focus on having eyes depicted in animals and humans, but other regions don't have this. So it's probably cultural differences within different groups. So we have basically differences in proportions of hunting scenes depicted. We don't have depictions of all species, like rhinos, for example, are missing in some pockets. But that could also be bias of the painters and not absence of fauna. Depictions of chariots are largely known from central India, as well as battle scenes. And then we have humped bull in southern Indian Neolithic and Chalcolithic. And this kind of matches up with the archaeological record also. For example, the ash mounds and other associated archaeology. And cattle hooves are also very common, but not known from central India, for example. So we have different histories of occupation, different cultural transitions. So everything is probably interconnected in terms of hunter-gatherer lifestyles versus farming lifestyle versus pastoralist lifestyles. So the themes are associated with these things. And then summarizing Konkan petroglyphs, so far over 1,200, and I think if I'm not wrong, maybe over 1,600 have been found across 140 sites across a stretch of 225 kilometers in the Konkan zone. And we have animal depictions, human depictions, and their age ranges are currently unknown, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And some of these engravings might be prehistoric, but it's not clear. Most of them, I'd rather be conservative and say they're younger than prehistoric age. And here are some examples, as we have already seen in Mudula's presentation and others' presentations. And just to highlight that these engravings extend beyond Konkan zone. For example, Kerala, Adakal caves, and in other sites also, Kerala. And there's engravings in Odisha also, for example, in northern India, various pockets, but they're more prominent in the southern zone and Konkan zone. And then fauna being depicted. Here's engravings of a deer, and then paintings showing similar themes. And then just getting to the southern Indian, northern Indian engravings, for example, here petroglyphs in the Himalayan zone, Spiti and Nubra Valley. And then we have the Sangankalu site, also with Neolithic figures. So these are just examples of what we know. And so far, the one dated one is an engraving from Kurnool Caves, which is about 5,000 years old, of a nested pattern or an abstract design. So far, this is the only one that was dated because it was covered by calcite. And the oldest reported engraving is coming from Acheulean layers in Bhimbetka, and some say this is controversial, and some accept this, but it should be put on record because it is published. And then finally, just getting to a challenge we have in comparing these things. One thing is methodological issues. So everybody has recorded things differently. As some of people have already highlighted, that we need consistency in our documentation at both documentation level, analytical level. So standardization in reporting also. Using of D-stretch needs to be more widespread so we can increase the number of paintings. Same goes for photogrammetry and other methods for petroglyphs. There's also a lack of quantification sometimes when we report sites. We report styles, descriptions, extent, distribution, but not counts or measurements that much. We need to deal with rock art the same way we deal with stone tools. We need to start getting more quantified data for more meaningful comparisons, and we're working on that slowly as well. And then using field forms. It would be nice if we can all work together and have the same format for recording, especially in rock paintings and those working in petroglyphs. So we can customize these things together and use them at a regional level so it's better communication and better comparisons. We also kind of look at tabulation of sites, which are facing in which direction, for example, which are in danger, which are safe. So get that kind of information also. Here's an example of counting individual sites in Mandiko area of Narmada Valley. And we try to count war scenes, for example, warriors, horsemen, to see if themes are connected spatially with known historical sites nearby, for example, or certain events. And then we get more detailed information by counting individual shelters to see if there's any patterns. These are some examples to show you. And now coming to the similarities between rock art of Konkan and paintings. Animal figures are similar. They also have human figures, abstract images, geometric designs. And when I say regional Indian style, what I mean by that is both zones or both types of data sets have things that are specifically South Asian, but not found, the styles are not found outside of South Asia. For example, rock art in Australia is different. Rock art of Southern Africa is different. Rock art in Levant is different. Rock art in Europe is different. So it's regionally different from the beginning. So we have possibly multiple origins of rock art and not a single origin and then spread. And then of course, some styles and depictions are common between the paintings and the petroglyphs. The differences are slightly more. Selection of space for work. The laterite ones are kind of at the moment, seem to be random, but we're looking for patterns. Whereas paintings are often done in concave recesses in the rock shelters or caves. The historical timings of discovery are different. Paintings were discovered much earlier, petroglyphs much later. Habitation evidence varies from region to region. The visibility is also different. It's enhanced for petroglyphs during monsoon because of the reflection of the sky. We have overlap or superimposition in paintings, but not in engravings yet that much, except some sites. And what is interesting is ethnic identity of the human figures are sometimes more clear in the paintings because the paintings are more detailed. So we can identify hunter-gatherers in the paintings. And even though we don't have color in the petroglyphs, we have the effect of color. So we have monochrome images as well as bichrome. And when I say bichrome, that is based on the relief. So we have light versus dark. And then use of space by subsequent religious groups. At some rock art sites, we have Buddhist stupas also built. We have Hindu structures also built. And now coming to the production and effort. For paintings, materials are collected on landscape, ground into powder, then mixed with binders to make pigments. And paintings may have been done individually as well as group efforts. And these paintings accumulated over time in most spaces, but the identity and social status of the painters is unknown. And if you compare with petroglyphs, locations may have been selected after surveys on the landscape, but we need to see if there's other subtle differences. Collection of material may have been required, for example, rocks. Some people have already tried experiments with the petroglyphs, making petroglyphs. For example, in Konkan, they have been successful with using pebbles and cobbles at some level. We don't know if metal was used. Maybe in the younger sites, metal was used. In older sites, stone was used. Larger petroglyphs may have been involved through group efforts, and clusters may have accumulated over time. And also the same problem, identity and social status of the engravers is not known at the moment. And then looking at substrate, bedrock. We have diverse rock types with paintings, but only laterite for now, petroglyphs. The quantity varies, density varies. The ages are unknown, but I'm giving Holocene ages for the paintings at the moment based on experiments done, preliminary dating done in Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh on some paintings by Ruben Banerjee. Then we have chronological schemes for paintings based on styles and superimpositions, but nothing at the moment for the petroglyphs. Themes and styles are both diverse in both data sets, and interestingly, scenes are absent or very low in the petroglyphs, and the purposes are not known at the moment for these paintings in various types of rock art. But one thing is interesting that maybe in Konkan, because the landscape is homogeneous and flat, and maybe different routes were taken by different pastoralists and farmers or other people, they could have been also used as navigation markers because they're all individual, kind of. No cultural connect with today's populations in the area, even though some sites are used religiously. Here's now just to show you photographs. Here's a Hindu shrine and Hindu writing at some of the rock art sites, paintings in Madhya Pradesh. And then we have similar rituals taking place in Konkan zone annually, where Devi Hasol, for example, where the site is being used spatially. Here we have an example of like a chariot depiction in Central India, which is rare in other zones, and I think currently absent in Konkan. And even in paintings, we have differences in style of elephants. Here we have an outline of the elephant, which is a simple outline, but then we also have paintings like this in Narmada Valley, which is colored completely. So evidence of domestication sometimes evidence of wild elephants, even being hunted. And then we have these kind of figures. I don't recall where this is from. I got it from the internet, but I just want to point out that you have seen the images of Ukshi the elephant at Ukshi, the elephant ears are depicted in the same manner. So that is also interesting that some similarities are there in the paintings as well. And rock art sites also have historical evidence, like hero stones, for example, or statues of deities, fallen structures of local temples, for example. Then graffiti is there. As far as I know, Konkan petroglyphs are getting affected by modern infrastructure and settlement patterns, but I've not seen graffiti. I could be wrong, but paintings have a lot of graffiti like this. Human figures are usually small in paintings. This is an exception, life-size figure in Mandiko. And I was talking about identity of individuals, or ethnic identity. Here we have tribal or hunter-gatherer forager identity, clear in the paintings. Same here, Adamgad, holding bows and arrows. But this is not clear in the petroglyphs, the identity of these people. Again, another tribal depiction. More intricate, more detailed. This is from the site of Churna in Panchmadi. And finally, this is an example of a game board found at many rock shelters and caves. But so far, as far as I know, no game boards have been found with petroglyphs. So this is just a very broad comparison between two different data sets. But once we start quantifying these things individually, we can, I think, get more meaningful data and also include ethnoarchaeology and other sources of information. Thank you very much.
Something to do with ear notching or cropping, which was done with domestic elephants. Like even if you look at sculpture, sometimes you know that the ears are a little bit bigger. So it could be a reflection. Like the one here, there's actually a cross carved into the ear itself. Mm-hmm. So it is partially stylistic, of course.
Right.
It also has something to do with practices that involve domestic elephants.
And this happens today as well?
Not so much today, but
okay. Earlier,
in the 90s it was pretty visible.
modifying the ears.
It's like a mark of ownership.
Right.
Cropping or notching. Mm-hmm. I think notching is there even today, but of course now it's the cattle also.
Right. Cattle also. Yeah, yeah.
In fact, with buffalo, if you look at the buffalo fairs that happen in India, many times they actually have these geometric patterns carved into the fur when they take for the fairs and stuff. So that's also another way of looking at it.
Right.
The elephant which you showed, the painted with solid,
Yeah.
that have some kind of garland around it.
Yeah, yeah. That is showing domestication. Yeah. Yes. I mean, we're planning that eventually. That's where we are working, trying to map them individually, looking if there's oriented in a certain manner, if there's any relationships with astronomical patterns, for example. So once we get more information from all these sites, I mean, not all 1,200 is impossible, but if we can look at specific clusters, then we can get purpose. But I think at the same time, we need to be a bit cautious because we might be looking at things in a biased way, and they could have been, some of them could have just been made for decoration. Or people say, as people say, time pass. So shepherds do that today as well. But who was making these things? Was there certain community members? Even the paintings, were they made by certain community members, or were everybody allowed to paint? This is not clear. Yeah.
Have you come across with the examples of natural fault lines or natural textures in the final creation itself? Like, and for both examples, for paintings as well as for engravings. I'm not seeing many paintings, but for the engravings, there are fault lines or some sort of deformations running across the main engraving itself. Like, for example, it was very difficult to decipher initially that which is a natural fault line and which is actually the line of the leg. I don't know if it was a conscious choice or not conscious choice. So
yeah, we need consistency in this. If we can get more engravings with that kind of pattern, then we can say they were selecting certain spots. But I do know one example from paintings in Spain, Altamira. They chose specific areas of the cave, the ceiling, which are more, sticking out with high relief. That's where they painted the bulls for 3D effect. So we have not seen this in India yet, but we do see them picking certain locations which are more protected from natural elements, for example, and other locations. But we have also seen rock art complexes which have many, many panels, and some of the panels are completely blank. So it's not clear why they just left some blank and then painted in others. We have not seen evidence of that, but microscopically, if we investigate, we might find that. Some places they do whitewash and then they paint, but that could be a very young, depiction, very young age. like medieval and younger.
Do you think the petroglyphs from Konkan, do you think they belong to one time period or that there are different time periods?
I would rather be, I'm more comfortable thinking they belong to different time periods, but not necessarily a long time span. And I think like some of the ones that will have deep engraving, they could have been made by iron tools, and some of the shallow ones could have been made by stone tools.
Is there a difference in style between the shallowly carved ones and the more deeply carved ones?
In terms of style, I would say the deepest ones are the geometric patterns. The other ones are pretty shallow.
So there is some kind of
Yeah. But only specifically for that geometric. And what is interesting is,
saw in the exhibition, it did look like there was different styles.
yes,
And even a few of them looked like there was even some superimposition.
Right.
Some part of it.
right.
So just I wanted you to a bit elaborate on that because that was.
And there's also some contradictions I keep seeing. For example, maybe some of the larger figures like elephants, they might have used, like, for example, drawn them first with a chalk or something, natural chalk, or did rangoli first, and then they carved it to get the proportions right. But then the geometric patterns, which are still worshipped today, one of them is not perfectly symmetrical or square. It's like a parallelogram. It's like squashed. So on one hand, they have these anatomically correct animals, but on the other hand, the other images are not perfectly symmetrical. So there's a lot of unpredictability.
Amount of effort and planning.
Yes. Correct. So they were not using maybe measurements or mathematics all the time. Maybe it was by eye as well.
Even in Sanchi, when you look at the zoomouts in Sanchi, there's one elephant which is almost photorealistic.
Yeah.
Somewhere else it looks completely like
Right.
like the actual thing. So it depends on time, depends on person.
Right. And just one last point, just looking at paintings and petroglyphs, I'm trying to especially inform people that I think we should be careful about labeling something as Mesolithic and labeling something as Mesolithic style. So, because that's very dicey. We have continuity in India for many things, bullock carts, paintings, so many different things, chulas. So, Mesolithic style could have continued into medieval times, modern times, but we should not equate that with age. So just to be cautious about that.
You were suggesting that one kind of dating that people have done
Yeah.
is looking at the subject matter of the
Yes.
of the painting.
Yes.
So if there are no domesticated animals, then it's Mesolithic. But you're
People have done this in the past. If a deer is looking very primitive and is always, and superimposition is showing underneath the more intricate designs, we can say, yes, it's older, but we cannot say how much older. It could be 1,000 years old, it could be 20,000 years old.
or could be just made an extinct.
Exactly.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
You've not shown it in your PPT, but there's a petroglyph which is there in the exhibition of a man holding a...
The two tigers, yes.
And that same image then gets represented on an Harappan seal,
Mm-hmm.
which again then gets represented on a Mesopotamian seal depicting the epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
So what is your view on the continuity or the transmission of this cultural idea from central India
Mm-hmm.
all the way to Mesopotamia?
This one.
Yeah.
So I'm very cautious about trying to link things across regions. It's also possible that there's parallel or convergence happening in these themes. For example, in the Bronze Age and later on even in the literature across the world, we have a common theme of floods, and that is between different cultures. So this could also be partly maybe folklore, like for example we have genetic drift or gene flow. The same thing, culture flow could have happened across generations and space and time, but not necessarily cultural contacts between people directly. It could be just folklore, oral traditions moving around, or some of the themes could be common, not necessarily connected. Independent but common. Yeah.
There's one more aspect of this figure, the Gilgamesh figure. The figures stay the same, but wherever you see it in Mesopotamia, you see it in Iran, you see it in India, you see it in Egypt, the animal changes. So So if you look at it that way, it could be that it's a common idea of a human resisting nature. It could be an idea of some proto-myth that has diverged along with different populations in different places, and they're localizing it. So in Iran, we see him fighting leopards.
Right.
In India, it's tigers. Even in Sanchi, it's there. In Egypt, there's one thing on a bone, I think, or on a tusk, where it's shown with crocodiles. So it's just the idea being transmitted and the details are changing over there. And very often you also have artistic motives actually traveling people there. It's easier to establish a chronology, like how we have the lion and the Samba are influenced by the Japanese land. So there we know that one thing has come before and one thing has come later. But in this case, the saying that it's transferring from one place to another when you don't have enough like chronological details is a little difficult. It's not always possible to say this came from here to here. It might just be coming from some other older source to both places.
And what is also mysterious is we expect some themes which are absent. Like in Madhya Pradesh, it's common to have bears in the forest, but we don't find depictions of bears in the paintings, for example. The ostrich eggshells were used by Microlithic populations, Mesolithic populations, for beads, for food, but we don't find depictions of ostrich in paintings that much, convincing depictions. So this is a mystery as well.
Some kind of taboo involved with
Yeah.
again, so I have done a documentation of animal from Sanchi. So you will find there's a few hundred lions there, even though it's not really lion territory. They're not one single tiger. You find a lot of buffaloes there, very few cattle. Even though again, numerically, if you talk biologically, it's the opposite. The other animal is more common to that area. But again, it could be some cultural bias, it could be some a taboo against depicting an animal or not. Because lions became at that point were associated with like kingship. So that old idea of the Ashokan lion, that was already there. But it's possible that tiger there was some taboo against because that was an animal you were actually in danger of. So again, there are a lot of factors.
Yeah. And as archaeologists, we should look for the patterns, but we should not expect them.